This is an Asus. It was given to me by a friend who bought it because they thought it looked funny, but then realized that it would be really ugly in their setup, so they gave it to me. Now I'm going to tell you the story of this Asus and how it came to be. The Asu's logo was first created on October 28, 1989, when the company was just 3 years old. At the time, the company's name wasn't Asus, but rather a made-up name called Pegasus. The name didn't last long because on April 1989, Asus changed their name to the acronym of their 4 founders, AN, Shinwoo, and Y, in order to come up with a new name for the company. They started brainstorming and eventually came up with the name Asus. It wasn't until 2 months later, though, that they had their logo designed. This is what it looked like. Basically, for initials inside of a diamond shape with a drop shadow beneath them. The text was set in a font called Ur, a geometric sans serif typeface released by the font foundry Stempel in 1967. When the logo was first released, the general consensus was that it kinda sucked. People said things like, looks like a cheap brand from Taiwan and not very inspiring or memorable. But other people liked it, saying that it was clean, simple, and professional. So clearly there were mixed opinions on the design itself, but no one could deny that it was effective at communicating the message of the company's new name, and that was enough for them to stick with it for several years. It wasn't until 1997 that the logo went through any major changes. By this point, the company was doing quite well and was becoming more popular outside of Asia. Because of this, they felt that their logo needed to reflect their growth and success. So they hired a new marketing agency and began working on a new identity system. This is what they came up with. They essentially took the 4-letter concept and expanded on it. Each letter was now separated and the negative space in between them was filled in, creating a series of abstract shapes. The logo was set in a font called a neo-grotesque font released by Font Bureau in 1994. The text also had a slightly larger drop shadow underneath it to give it some depth. Some people really loved this design, calling it bold, unique, and unforgettable, while others felt that it was too busy and hard to read. Overall, though, it was a big improvement over the previous design and helped establish Asus as a strong international brand. In 2003, Asus became the #1 motherboard manufacturer in the world, and they decided to celebrate by giving their logo another makeover. They got rid of the shadows and rounded off all the corners, which resulted in a softer, more friendly-looking logo. Some people liked this design, calling it clean and modern, but others felt that it was too similar to the previous design and didn't really offer anything new. In 2007, Asus began expanding into consumer electronics such as smartphones, netbooks, and their logo was used on all these products and their packaging, which meant that it needed to be simplified even further. They stripped away all the shapes and left only the letters remaining. The logo was set in a font called Proxima Nova, a neo-grotesque font released by Font Bureau in 2004. This was a huge departure from their previous designs, but it was necessary in order to scale down the logo without losing its impact. I actually really like this design, but I can see why some people might not. It is very basic and doesn't have any of the unique characteristics that made their previous logos stand out. In the end, though, simplicity is what made this design work so well. It was clean, easy to remember, and looked great on both large and small sizes. Plus, it effectively communicated their brand message. So it was a huge success for the company. By 2011, Asus was selling motherboards, graphics cards, laptops, phones, tablets, and all sorts of other tech gadgets. Their logo was everywhere. In fact, it was so ubiquitous that people began to take it for granted. It was no longer seen as something special or unique, and this led to yet another redesign in 2014. Asus wanted to create a logo that was more dynamic and exciting. They did this by adding diagonal lines to the letters, which gave the logo some movement and energy. They also updated the font to Proxima Nova Bold, which was thicker and more impactful than the regular version. Finally, they added a subtle color gradient, which made the logo more eye-catching and helped it stand out from the competition. But before we get into whether or not this logo is any good, let's talk about how it relates to graphic design principles. First off, let's look at contrast. Contrast is the difference between light and dark values. As you can see, there is very little contrast in this logo. Everything is relatively light gray, which makes it hard to read. This is a problem because logos need to be legible. If people can't read your logo, they won't be able to understand what your business does. Next, let's look at hierarchy. Hierarchy is the arrangement of elements based on their importance. In this case, the most important element is the word Asus. Unfortunately, this isn't very clear. All the different lines are competing for attention, and nothing is really standing out. This is a problem because logos need to be scanned. If people can't quickly scan a logo and take in all the information, they're going to miss important details. Now, let's look at balance. Balance is the distribution of visual weight in a composition. This logo is perfectly balanced, which is a good thing. Logos need to be stable and balanced. If they're not, people will find them to be unsettling and confusing. So now let's get back to talking about the logo. What do I think of it? Well, I think it's an improvement over the previous design, but I don't think it's a very strong logo. The main problem is that it's too busy. There are way too many lines and shapes going on, and it makes it hard to read. Another problem is that the color gradient is way too subtle. It's almost not even there. A gradient can add some interest to a logo, but it needs to be strong enough to make an impact. Unfortunately, this gradient doesn't do either of those things. Let me show you a few examples of logos that do these things better. This is the Apple logo. At first glance, it may seem simple, but there's a lot going on here. The silhouette of the apple is instantly recognizable. The bite out of the apple gives it some personality, and the 7 colors represent the rainbow and Apple's commitment to diversity. This is the Nike logo. It's simple, memorable, and impactful. The swoosh represents movement, and the checkmark represents excellence. This is the Netflix logo. It's bold, colorful, and iconic. The red N represents passion, and the white background represents cleanliness. All these logos have one thing in common. They're simple, memorable, and impactful. They use basic shapes and colors to communicate their message, and they're easy to scan, which means that people can quickly take in all the information. This is what makes them effective. Asus logo has some of these qualities, but I don't think it's simple or memorable enough. It's also not very impactful. When I see this logo, I don't feel anything. I don't think it's a bad logo, but I don't think it's a great logo either. It's just okay. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think of the Asus logo? Do you like the old versions or the new versions? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about logo design, I'll leave some resources in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.